So, good evening, and welcome to the first lecture for guest lecture for World Architecture and History class. This evening we're very honored and pleased to have Suzanne Blier here speaking to us, and her Professor Blier's scholarship extends and has basically uncovered a vast territory of diverse African arts and architectures, and her current work extends into an open source world map. And please join me in welcoming Professor Blier.
It's a huge lecture I should put together for you, and I decided that instead of doing a formal lecture, that I would do something which is for me in many respects both more fun and more illuminating. And I thought, what better occasion to take advantage of the fact that I was here at RISD than to present you with material from this open source website that I've been working on. And I'll give you a brief history of it as we're going forward, in part to inspire you to begin to play. This is for me, as much as anything, a combination of a toolbox and a site in which you can do potentially all kinds of extraordinarily fun and illuminating kinds of projects, whether it has to do with the history of architecture or questions of urban planning or context of landscape. So the format's going to be, I'm doing this basically live on the site, and I thought that I basically divided into about 3 different parts. I'm going to show you the rudiments of the site itself, so if you've got laptops with you and want to join me, that's perfectly fine. We'll create some material on the site. Then I'll go and show you some of the material that's already at the site, focusing in particular on Africa. And then I'll go to 2 of the sites that I've created, one addressing African landscape and the other addressing history of urbanism, and we'll see where we are from there. So this is the site itself, worldmap.harvard.edu. It's open to everybody. You'll have to log in. And right now we've got some close to 6,000 registered users. There are about 1,200 at Harvard, and other people are from around the world. It's all open source, and basically you see the site here. I thought that I would begin by showing you just the kinds of things I hit on. View a map. Right now, as you can see, there are roughly 15 different kinds of map layers in place, and they range from, well, let me show you, I'm not sure what all of these are. There's a big Japan map, a large China map. I'm going to be showing you specifically Africa map, which was the first of the maps to build. But this is one that suggests some of the potentials of the system. This is a map, a map is basically a set of maps that was put together through the group at World Map, which is basically one full-time employee and then a couple of students. This was done for Hillary Clinton and showing women leadership context around the world. And the way it works, they've added various different kinds of categories. We can look at the legend here. And it gives the color symbolization. You click on identify, and it will take you to a particular individual's website, and if they've got a video, we could click on it. And this is basically how the system works. There you can add YouTubes, you can add images, and you can also begin to think about how you're going to construct various ideas through the different aspects of it. We have faculty from around the university who are working on this, and this was also one of the relatively early maps. It began as Africa Map, and I'll tell you the sort of prehistory of it, but very early on, scholars and students at the Kennedy School realized the potential of this. We're basically using GIS, Geographic Information Systems, which allows you to overlay a series of different layers, and they put this together for Boston. And so you can bring up, this has to do with census data, high school dropout rates. You can zoom in and out, and again, look at legends and the like. You can add any of the layers in the system that people have agreed to let one use, and most people are perfectly happy to do that. I basically suggested to them it'd be great to bring in some historic mapping data looking at earlier periods, and so we can see how that kind of issue works as well. And this is basically material that was put together. Currently, the Massachusetts state government is using this to try to deal with economic disparities in the western part of the state. So you can see basically how this works. So most of this material is online and available for everyone, and we've provided as much data as we can on the sources of this information as well. So let me go, and I thought what I would do at this point is to create a map with you. So far what we've been doing is looking at View a Map. There's a how-to video here, and there's a lot in the About page on different kinds of resources. But to create a map, we simply click on that Create a Map icon. And I was thinking about various kinds of things that we might create. I went from Spiral Jetty to Providence, Rhode Island, and I decided for various reasons that maybe going to Paris might ultimately be the most fun. And so that's what we're going to do. So what you can't see that I'm doing shift left mouse and basically windowing in to a particular area. We can decide how large or how small we want it. So my thought is roughly there. What do you think? Does that work for you? Excellent. So we've got that much done. So now we're going to save our map. Let's call it Paris, I don't know, Paris map or something. We can do anything we want. We can add a name here, or if not, it'll give us an automatic numbering system. We can add an abstract. I can remove all of this information, and we can add in anything. Additionally, there are all kinds of ways that one can stylize this. But here, let's just add Paris. All right, and then I'm going to click Save here. And this is our Paris map. That's how difficult it is to create a map. Now the fun part is to populate it. So I thought the first thing we would do was to go in and bring in some of the various layers that are already in the system. There are, at this point, literally thousands of layers from around the world. And what you're seeing here is it's already suggesting those layers that specifically have data on this particular geographic area. And there are 262 that it's recommending. Everything from, these are administrative boundaries of various sorts, water features, country boundaries, different kinds of cities. But I'm just going to bring up some of my favorites. And one of my very favorites is Wikipedia, no matter where in the world I'm working. So Wikipedia, I'm clicking on that. Gaul level 2 is administrative boundaries. I'm not sure. I've been working, I teach a class on World's Fairs, and that might be from there. But then, so I click the ones I like, then I click Add Features, and each of these dots is a Wikipedia entry. So you can see it's highlighted to identify, And then if I click in the middle of the dot, and it'll take us to the Wikipedia entry, which we have here. This happens to be an airport. But you can see that kind of data. So we've got Wikipedia. I have no idea what this is. So this was probably in, let's see if we can zoom to the layer inside of Paris. There we go. This is a plan for the 1931 Exposition Coloniale. But I'm going to zoom out again a little bit further. Each time you save it, you can save it to a new set of boundaries. I'm going to add here water. And the water data we have is really quite striking. DCW water features is basically every brook and stream from around the world. If that's too much and it's too complicated, you can simply do major water. You can see down here an array of global health and UN data kinds of material, world rivers as well. World rivers tends to be like the Mississippi, the Rhone, etc. So we're adding water. I thought we would add soil. So this is a digital soil map of the world. And you can basically go through the whole set of different kinds of things. And the advantage of a GIS system is if I right-click on it and I go to Layer Properties, you can see here there's an opacity bar that allows me to bring back this soil map to something so that I can see other things within it. And you can turn things on and off. Now, one of the things that one generally wants to do is to put point files towards the top. So I'm going to put Wikipedia at the top. And these are fine here. We can change the name of something, so I could change this to administrative boundaries. And I'll show you how, when you're adding layers, you have a choice as to who you would like to be able to see a particular layer. So this is basically how the system works from within. You're pulling up a set of different kinds of layers from within the system and from without. So I thought what I would do is then go to, well, first of all, let's go to the New York Public Library. And they have a wonderful tool, a map warper, which allows you to georeference any of the maps in their system. And that basically means that you're bringing that map into agreement with the actual GIS, the latitude and longitude. And I did it, let me go with the, you'll have to, again, it's open to everybody, you have to log in. I did a search of rectified maps only, but you can go in and rectify, and I'll show you how we do that. We've basically borrowed a lot of their system for our own. This one is already rectified with 5 points. And so what I'm going to do is to bring it into the map that we just created. When you're dealing with historic maps, not everything is, of course, scientifically correct. But here I clicked on Export. You can download it to your laptop, or you can simply link to it, which is what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to click on Tiles and copy this particular one and go back. This is our map here. I'm going to add layers. I'm going to external data. I'm going to add another server, paste the URL, add the server, and here it is. This is basically an early plan with the monuments of Paris. And then we can, here it is. And let me just change this to historic maps or plans. And if we move in, we'll see basically where we are in terms of this particular one. And you can, what's wonderful is you can zoom to a particular area, and you can also then bring up Street View, and let me see if that will allow us to. I'm not sure why it's not working right now. Maybe it's a little bit slow, but that'll allow you to actually walk the streets of Paris. Now, we just received funding to create a mobile app for this. And what this means is that you will be able to walk any place in the world, download maps, and basically look at them as you are traveling on that. I'm still not sure why that's not functioning. But in any event, let's, so this is how you bring in maps from another site, such as New York Public Library. And this is basically how you georeference maps within the system itself. And as I mentioned, I was debating about what kind of a map we would make, so I did a couple of ones just this afternoon, Providence, Spiral Jetty, etc. But let's look at Paris, because these are a number of early ones that I had georeferenced earlier, and I'll show you how we do that. Anything that stands out that pre-Houseman Paris is I think one of the nice ones. So let's look at that. I clicked on Rectify. So how this system works is you can download any map to your laptop or your desktop, or you can scan it. And this will allow you to upload any map that you want to the system. And you can decide who you want to be able to see it by basically making it public or not making it public, or there's also another form that you'll fill out that allows you to add other individuals basically by adding their emails, which enables one to do that. So let me do the search for Paris again. And most everybody who's been adding plans and maps and the like have been willing to open them up to everyone basically. So here I'm going to do much the same thing. I'm going to click on, well, let me show you how you georeference it first of all. What you want to do is to find at least, for many of you, this is already something that you're well aware of, but what you want to do is to find at least 4 points or 3 points of comparability. So let's say we add another point. I clicked on the pencil. I'm going to add a point there and add a point there. And then I'm going to click down here to add control point. We can go and add as many as we would like, but that shows basically how it's working. If you click over here on control points, you can delete one if you'd like, or delete all of them and start over again. And once you've got 3 or 4, basically, you click warp image, and what that's going to do is to bring the map that you've just uploaded. I guess it doesn't like or maybe this one's not a particularly well rectified one. Let me go back to the previous one. And let me see that one. Take a preview of it. Nope. There we go. So here we're going to, again, click on tiles, copy this, go back to our Paris map. We're going to external data, add another server, and bring that into play with the other set of map material. And you can, as I mentioned, you can move things around as one would like, and you can play with the various aspects of opacity and the like, and so you can begin to see the city in various ways. Now, the other thing that one can do with this is, as we move out, you can also begin to add other kinds of data. So for example, we have various feeds running through this. So we've got Picasa, and let's type in the word, let's say, Eiffel Tower. And we're going to add the Picasa images to the map, and that will, you can create your own context of photographs and bring them in with particular codes, or you can take what's already there through Picasa, and the closer you zoom in, the more that will come up. So here we're actually getting street view, but these will take you to Picasa and actually to the sites of them. You can add YouTube, you can add the geospatial library, basically a set of historic maps that are a series of different universities around the country are bringing together maps of various sorts. So you get a sense of the array of different data and the varying kinds of materials that you can bring into a context such as this. I've been working, among other things, on histories of cities and World's Fairs, but you can also easily bring in plans of buildings and larger area maps. There are an array of different things that ultimately one could do. So I'm going to, if I wanted to save this map, which we could, I would, again, click here and then click another save here. But I thought what I would do is to show you at this point some of the other potentials of this and the sorts of things that one can do with maps of this sort. So one of the first things that I've begun doing is collecting historical maps of cities in Africa. And a number of these are, for example, World War II maps. And I've also begun creating maps for various countries in Africa. So here's one that I've begun putting together for Morocco. And we've got an array of US Army and other kinds of mapping. So I thought it might be interesting to begin by going to Marrakesh and looking at how the city has changed over time. And so here again, this is an US Army map, and one can begin to explore various aspects of the city in relationship to the city today, how the city plan itself has changed, and other kinds of features. I'm not sure where this one is coming from. But again, we've got an array of this stored. You can add languages and other features as well, rivers, ecosystems, and that may be where that one is.
Can you add infrastructure?
You can, yeah, you can add, and one of the great things that we've just recently introduced is you can create features, or you can copy features. So let me put back the Marrakesh Army map, and we've created something so that basically we can create a feature, or actually begin here with add a layer, create a layer, and here we can say
sensory.
What?
Sensory.
Sensory.
Can that be a layer feature? Like sense of sound or smell?
You can bet however you would like to do it, and then you could add presumably video and the like. In this case, let me just add something of tunnels or something. So you can create it as a point layer. You can create it as a line or a polygon. Here I'm going to create it as a polygon. We want to add, I was thinking of Paris sewers. I'm not sure why I'm picking tunnels in Marrakesh, but, and then you're basically agreeing to not mess up the system. And we're going to click on, and here's where basically you can decide who you want to be able to see what you've added. Right now I'm letting anyone see. You can add only users, and basically you add people's email addresses and they can come into it and can see it or add other material to it. So here, this is basically going to go and begin to create that site. And while it's with the tunnels, and then we can create a polygon in relationship to that, but let me go back and tell you a little bit about the history of the project itself. Almost 20 years ago or so, I was teaching at Columbia and moved to Harvard and was invited to apply for a grant, which is relatively unusual. And, but what was more unusual was that, and here this is the second form I need to fill out. This is just basically going to ask me what kind of a feature I'm doing. So I'm going to move all the way down to the bottom. And let's say that this is a structure. So I'm going to click on that. And then I'm going to update. So there we go there. So I was invited to apply for a grant. And the only prerequisite was that, one, it had to change the world. For an art historian, not the way I necessarily think. And two, it had to be expensive. So just two qualities that, or attributes that I was not used to looking at. So at that time, I knew that I wanted to bring some 25,000 slides, scanned slides up from Columbia to Harvard. So I thought maybe I would do something with the web. And at that time, I thought anything having to do with computers would be relatively expensive. So I was competing with these various scientists, and lo and behold, I ended up getting the grant. And here was what I proposed to them. It was a project on the social roots of creativity. And so my basic question was, why is it that you have, at different places, at different moments in time, striking aspects of creativity? It clearly is not DNA, because if that would be the case, Greece and Italy and any number of other historic centers would be in a very different place than they are today. And clearly it's not simply a question of education, because one can invest a lot of money across the population into art-related endeavors, and you're not necessarily going to greatly change the dynamics of innovation and creativity just by the fact of teaching everyone aspects of art. So what I proposed was that innovation and creativity in some way were linked to ideas of crises and multiple cultures and ethnicities and people from different historical backgrounds coming together. So I proposed three different kinds of contexts. One is the Italian Renaissance, and I was linking that in part to the fall of Constantinople and the arrival of ideas and individuals and artifacts from the East into Italy. It was also a time of important economic crisis, and so all of those factors I considered were probably in part in play and in the fluorescence in Italy in this period. A second example was Paris, circa 1900, in the aftermath of the colonial era and the later aftermath of the Industrial Revolution. All of these populations coming into Paris, thinking about new forms, new ideas, really reinventing the world anew. And the third example was New York in 1945, 6, 7, in the aftermath of World War II, with the arrival of much of the European intellectual community, working together in contexts that to some degree drew on their historical background, but also helped to reshape the New York art scene. And I proposed basically studying this in Africa by looking at correlationships between everything from geography to history to different kinds of art forms. So you can see here, now we have our tunnels, and then I'll come back to this, but here. So we're going to create a feature, and basically we decided we're going to do a polygon. So this is our polygon. We can name it tunnels. We can edit it and change its coloration. We can do all kinds of things. And in much the same way, you can create a point layer, and then you can embed into it images, as long as they're coming from some kind of website or YouTube. And one of the most important things about the system, we have an amazing help desk, but we've also got this amazing, I've forgotten how long it is now, it's something like, it's 39 pages, with really detailed information on how you do everything from adding new layers to adding particular points. So this gives you an idea of the kinds of things that one can do. You can then, you can create layers, as I mentioned. You can print this out. You can share it with others. You can embed the link in a blog. And you can basically, in embedding the link, you can bring people to the exact same set of overlays that you want to do. We're adding shortly measuring features so that you could measure basically the area within a particular polygon. You can locate distances. You can upload it all to Google Earth and play with it in that particular aspect. And if you want, and you have enough resources, you can take the whole system and download it to your own servers. It's all open source. And so we've got a collaboration or collaborations with universities and institutions around the world. Right now we've got a big one that's just begun with Cornell University, and they're working particularly on India, but they're basically taking the whole of our system, and we'll be working technically together so that we can build tools that will help both of us. So in addition, we've got collaborations with UNESCO, the UN University, which is based in Tokyo, has a collaboration with us to trace the illicit trade of flora and fauna in Africa. There's such a great variety of things that one can do. So I'll leave Paris and let me go basically to Africa itself, and then I'll go to the couple of sites that are sort of more of my research sites within it. So this is Africa Map, and is one of the most strongly developed. I have here languages in Africa. We can switch that in a minute to ethnicities. We've got of course, ethnographic maps are in their own way very dishonest because the country and the ethnicities never looked quite like this, but this gives you a sense of it. We have a search tool here, so let's say we're working on Yoruba. I can do a search, and that will highlight, whoops, if I spell it right, where the Yoruba are located within, so it's basically searching through all of this kind of data. One of the things that I use extensively, here I'm going to get rid of the ethnicity. Undo that. As I mentioned, we've got Wikipedia in place. We've got country boundaries. This is a data set that's available for the world. We've only brought it into Africa so far. There are over 2 million place names and features that are available. It's basically CIA data, but they've made it available to the world. You can decide to use it or not to use it. But for example, I work these days in Nigeria, which is, I'll show you, it's basically in this area. And I've long been interested in the routes that go, this is the Niger River, and this is the Benue River that goes up to the Lake Chad area. And I've always been interested in the east-west trade routes, that basically coming down the Nile and going into Africa this way. And I typed in wadi, which is basically bringing up all of the references to specific wadis in Africa, arguing that it really was far too difficult to cross the Sahara Desert for many people. And this was a very easy route, but it wasn't controlled for much of the period by Muslims, but for key periods of time by the Copts, the Coptics, who were important traders. So you can do a search on basically anything you want. As I mentioned, it's readable in some 30 different languages. And here too, I'm going to try to find one that's a bit isolated. You can, it'll tell you, so the one I just clicked on, it's a particular point. I have symbolized it, so it's pretty stunning that Africa's looking pretty blue here. But as you get in, each of these, and we can bring up, I think the legend should be here as well, different kinds of things that come into play. Blue, of course, is water, but we've got other attributes as well. And it's really amazing set of materials to look at. But among the other ones that you might find interesting, lots on environment, from rivers to soils, again, so you can get a sense of that. Linguistic, health-related data, trade routes, which can be important. We've got some amazing historic maps, and this is basically downloading maps, georeferencing them, and bringing them into the system. And so here you could look at, let's say, the overlay between an historic map and ethnographic data to see basically who was where in a particular period. And just I'm going to end this particular section with, we brought in together a lot of a data set at Emory University looking at the slave trade. So looking at slave ports around the world, and that of course includes Boston and Providence, among other places. You can also decide what you want to look at. And then we've brought in, let's say, legs, meaning particular ships from Africa, from Europe to Africa to the Americas. And if you click on a particular line, if I'm able to get it right, it will take you directly to the Emory University website and will provide you with the name of the captain, the weight, where it went. This was actually, interestingly enough, from Mozambique to Boston, and you can begin to look at all kinds of data. Now, it's fascinating for historians, but it's also fascinating just in terms of thinking about larger issues of population movements over time. So I'm going to leave that and end with basically two. I'm going to do them more in a shorter fashion, but this is one. It's a center I'm working on in Nigeria that's today a living city of considerable size. It's a Yoruba city, and it goes back to the 9th or 10th century. I'm not sure why there we go. But its period of greatest importance was around 1300 in the current era. And so it's a place where I've been doing extensive work and mapping out archaeological sites, but also looking at the early plan of the city. So these are the wards. And I just wanted to show you some of the interesting things that one can do. It was a walled city, much like European walled cities. So adding in, much in the same way that we created particular layers, so the different periods in which the walls were built, and then you can begin to think about the division of the city according to different kinds of political engagements. It was ruled not only by a king whose palace was in the center, but an array of chiefs who were basically positioned around the perimeter of the city. And then one could look at, one of the things that I've been doing recently is to look at view sheds. The city itself is shaped like a bowler hat. So the palace is in the direct middle of the city on a hill. It slants downward, and then there's hills circulating the city. And so I was interested in who could see what from where. So this is basically what you can see from the palace. And then the various chiefs who controlled and still control the principal archaeological sites and the political workings of the city, you can see what kinds of view sheds they have in contradistinction. So I've turned off the palace. And my argument is that one of the reasons why this is one of the very longest lasting kingdoms, one of the 3 longest lasting in the world, is because they had this amazing balance of power. So this is basically in part an argument to that. But you can also see here I've brought in different kinds of facial marking patterns. I think I've got too much up for one to see all this. but it gives you a sense of the kinds of explorations that one can do in mapping out a city and looking at questions, everything from landscape to the history of the city itself. And the last of the ones that I want to look at is, let me go back, I'm going to leave this page, and it's a city in the nearby country of Benin. And here, basically, it's a city that I've also worked on extensively, and did interviews with some 1,500 different families, and identified their histories, where they came from, and during the reign of what particular ruler they had an important, their ancestors had an important place. So here's the city. We could zoom out to see where it is. It's also a walled city. And over the course, I've added materials on different parts of the palace and what was where. Over the course of its history, each of the kings built a separate palace. And so you can see the creation of these palaces, which basically I've added into play. And you can also see, as one is looking at this, the form that the actual history of the city took. So one is really talking about a conceptualization of space that spirals out as one moves up in time from the center to the periphery, each of these areas basically taking over pre-existing land in a form of ongoing urban renewal and urban development. Let me move in a little bit. And then one can look at, and these are among the things that I did, lands owned by royals, which was a huge amount of land by the end, which were owned by the royals, and you get a sense of how basically top-heavy it was, documenting what particular families came in and what particular eras, and so thinking about aspects of land use and the development of the city over time. And of course, this is an area that we could add others. But then you can go and look at occupations. Where did the artists live, for example? Where, and did other people, engineers, grave diggers, and the like? Or you can look at particular Abomey lineages, one by one, or looking at the set of lineages as a whole, and thinking about many of these are identified with particular ethnicities who were brought in through the course of many centuries of warfare, but others are associated with particular lineages associated with occupations among these, the artist lineage, which is this particular one. So I think that's basically all that I wanted to present. I'm happy to add other things, but more importantly, I wanted to show you the potentials of this. Speaking specifically from Africa, I think one of the things that's really important to bear in mind is that when we began, people basically were saying, is there enough information in Africa to actually imagine putting together something like this in the context of a website? And one of the problems that we've been having actually is that there's simply so much data, and that can find use in so many different ways, whether you're looking at urban planning or healthcare or political dynamics. And the idea that one can share this across various different geographical boundaries, I think, is particularly important. So I'm hoping that you will have fun with it, and looking forward to the kinds of creative things that you'll be able to do with it. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to answer, well, I can ask questions too, but
just ask.
yeah, I can ask, okay, but I'm happy to answer questions. Yes?
Just ask something. So you said this project started about 20 years ago when you...
Yeah, the first one, well, I moved to Harvard, I guess 18 years ago, received the grant about 2 years later, and we had, the original form of it was called Baobab. And there I had brought in all of the slides and were beginning to create this material. We were actually the first ones at Harvard to use GIS, and it was unbelievably primitive and very difficult. And that project ran its course for after about 8 or 9, 10 years. And then in about 2006, Harvard created a new Center for Geographic Analysis. It's one of the few universities around the world that got rid of its geography department and I think regretted it. So we created this institute. And it happened to be chaired by a sinologist who's an historian, Peter Bohl, whom I knew from faculty meetings to be one of the most difficult people on campus. And so I thought, great, he's my person. So I went up and introduced myself and asked him if he wanted to do a project on Africa and co-chair it with me, and he said, no, of course not. And I said, why not? And he said, I don't know anything about Africa. And I said, well, I don't care. You've got this great new center, you're a great administrator. And so that's how it began. He hired someone who's absolutely brilliant named Ben Lewis, who he did his undergraduate work at Wisconsin in Chinese literature and languages, and then got a degree in urban planning from Penn. And so early on, he was using a lot of the same programmers that he'd been working on. So I see that he's certainly one of these amazingly creative individuals, but also somebody who really can talk and get things done. And so it's in large measure as a result of them coming together and then putting together the System for Africa, that as we began doing demos around and about, people from other walks of life on campus began seeing what we were doing. And now School of Public Health is one of the big users. The GSD is another big user. What I would love to see happen, and it's not yet there, is something so that we can bring in Illustrator, for example, into world maps so that one can download or basically do the basic GIS work. I mean, what we're doing in the most clear-cut way, it's two things. One, this is a Wikipedia for mapping, but you get to control what data. Once you've created a site, only you or people you designate can add to it, so you get to control content. And B, we're creating in a much simplified fashion and in an open source way the GIS tools for everyone to use. I mean, I tried for years to get graduate students and undergraduates to learn GIS well enough in a semester so that they could actually use it on projects. And one after the other, it's too much work. It's such a labor-intensive kind of thing. And this sort of thing, you can get them up and using it within a couple of hours. So that was the other part.
Can I ask something also? I know that your scholarship also has some has to do with anthropology.
Yeah.
And I would consider your work as like seminal in bringing anthropology into art history discourses. One way of
Right.
So bringing anthropology. So how do you see the shift from, let's say, and I would consider in your work anthropology of a situated object in practices, rituals, cultures. How would you see the move from that to a more geographic, let's say, mapping?
Yeah. Well, I would say, first of all, that how many of you have been to Africa and spend much time there? Like more than 2 weeks? Okay. One of the things that happens is, and it's not just Africa, but you arrive, it's the same thing in South America. You arrive and you begin talking to people and you begin working, and you realize very soon you've got to throw away almost everything that you had learned or thought about the continent. And it happens to be that a lot of the early seminal research on Africa was done by anthropologists. And whether they were looking at language or whether they were looking at society or whether they were looking at religion, certainly in the history of art, nobody was looking at these kinds of cultural complexities. And so one of the things that just interviewing people, it sounds shocking, but in the context of art history, very few people actually spend the time to interview people, and that's one of the characteristic methodological bases in anthropology. And so you're working on contemporary issues, but I would say the most important thing, not only about anthropology, but I think good scholarship more generally, is you forget what field you're in, what discipline you're in, and you just go completely outside of it and draw where you can. And I think that whether you're dealing with ethnicity or context of real geography and landscape, that this provides you another way of doing it and bringing materials together in new kinds of ways. So I don't see one as necessarily excluding the other. It just enables one to do kinds of work that one couldn't before, I think. Other questions? Yes?
How does the open source work with like verifying the information? Not that necessarily someone's wanting to
Right.
be harmful.
That's a great with verifying. Oh, I know what you're saying. Yeah, that's a terrific question. And and let me answer it in two ways. One, the first way, and I'm not saying this. I'm saying this seriously. There's a lot of data on the site that we know to be wrong and are perfectly happy putting it up there. For example, ethnographic data, it never was, these hard and crisp lines, never will be present day or in the past, but this kind of material is really important to have nonetheless. So we're perfectly happy to have multiple different kinds of mapping up there. But I think you're asking a different kind of question. And so in addition to the funding we got to create a mobile app, we also got funding to create a tool that allows one to comment on maps. And with that, there's going to be a checkoff box, something along the lines of recommend or hide, if you think about regular blogs, that kind of thing. And so the idea is that at this point in time, as I mentioned, we've got one full-time staff person, and I go around with my hat asking for money where I can. Let me pass it around now. But we don't really have the staff to go through and correct everything. So if we get a lot of, this can be machine done, layers or maps that are identified as hide or problematic, then we'll take a look at them and remove them that way. We had a big conference last spring, and there are just such fascinating new things coming in. We've got somebody who's created the software and world map to go through the whole expanse of Twitter. This is a massive amount of material, and look at it from the vantage point of particular terms. He was looking at Arab Spring and looking at particular terms in Arabic for prayer and praises, not only to get the time and place, but also to look at what vantages people were coming from in terms of the kinds of words that play. So this idea of using crowds in various ways, whether it's crowdsourcing data or thinking about this as a vehicle for bringing together and analyzing or simply presenting all kinds of different data. And some of it will be creative and wrong, and some of it will be creative and right, and some of it will be academic and wrong. And in a certain sense, we're happy with that mix of things. Yes?
Yeah, so based on that question, so is it going to be this website going to be more like Wikipedia, the like open resources compared to like academic reference base?
You can do with it what you want. Harvard has made a commitment, this we got about 3 or 4 years ago, to whatever this means, right? And anybody can change their mind, but basically to preserve this and keep this going over the long haul. I've done demos at everything from the World Bank, the State Department, to National Geographic, and I think the idea that it's open source and the idea that it can become an arena where people from just across so many different backgrounds can come into play and make use of the material. I mean, that's to me what's wonderful. There's so many of us, and I imagine you as well, where you brought together data for your master's thesis or whatever. Let's say you're working on a building or on a place, and then once that's done, that data is lost. And if there's a way that we can bring this kind of data together, to say nothing of, uploading all of the master's projects from RISD or some other place onto your own site that you can, if you want, easily embed into the RISD website, so that you click on it and you get to each student's particular projects, and finding a way to, it's particularly now a lot of people in the medical fields who've downloaded some of the most amazing satellite imagery, but that's imagery that's critical for any architect. And so finding a way to share these scarce resources. Yes, in the back.
Is there any way to export these maps so they become part of like your work rather than screenshots or?
Yes, 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 absolutely. You can share the map right here. And so you can download it, is that where it is? No. But absolutely, you can download it in any number of formats. Is it here? No. But yeah, absolutely. You can download it in GIS format or any other ones to convey. You can also, you can see if you're not happy with your particular set of changes, you can look at, this will basically give you the history of your particular, this is something that they added in the last day or two. Click on a point and it'll give you the latitude and longitude, which is kind of a neat feature. So, but yes, absolutely. Yes.
One thing I want to say is just it's really amazing tool for architects or architecture students, because like it's always the idea of when you're designing something in the city or in we're designing some place that has cultural significance, you really want to gather the information, and normally what we do is we draw the map ourselves and then we're trying to analyze, and I think this is a great tool to
Fabulous.
information together. Do you have any plan just to introduce this thing to a lot more architecture institutions around the world? And I think that will be beneficial to architects.
That's a great idea. I mean, this is why I did this. I mean, I could have done something academic, and I can put people to sleep probably more readily than anybody else. That was a joke. I try not to, but I think the point is that a number of you are architecture students, and so I wanted to show this to you. If you have other thoughts on that, I would love it. I mean, it might be a question of, I mean, one of the real, I'll say tragedies, but you know, there's scales of tragedies, but around the country, all of these master's projects and PhD projects in architecture schools are lost. Unlike if you're writing an academic thesis where you've got a print copy, and if it's a dissertation, PhD dissertation will go off to Michigan and made available. I think it's, criminal, appalling, whatever. And so I'm thinking maybe it's a sort of thing that we could get together a series of schools of architecture to apply to the Graham Foundation or somebody else, so that we could put together a kind of project that would enable people to preserve that kind of data and to use the system in that way. Maybe it could. We're happy to have it rest on your servers if you want. We're also happy to try to engage in it resting on our servers. What we're actually using right now, we've got Amazon is sponsoring a fair amount of cloud space for us, but it's the sort of thing you've hit on exactly what I had wanted to do here, and I'm absolutely delighted that you brought that up, because that is indeed my hope.
To follow that, if the goal is to get this into more hands, why, I mean, you're already piggybacking off Google, do you have any, or have you made any overtures to them, or vice versa? Or does that compromise somehow the nature of the open source?
Well, that's a great question. I would say our first priority, and it's not a priority as such, I began the second phase, so the Africa map, world map phase, with $30,000 from the provost. And, we did this, and we've gotten a bit more funding over time for Japan map. They gave us a bit of money to create that. So this is shoestring, really. And so what we've done, our focus has been on creating the tools for people to build it themselves, basically. And consistent with that, the operating procedure is low-hanging fruit. I gave what's available and useful. I gave a demo, as I mentioned, at National Geographic, and it happened that the U.S. geographer, I didn't even know he had one, but it's sort of like the Lord of Geography of the U.S., was at the demo. And at the end of it, he raised his hand, and I called on him. He said, "There's a problem with your system." And I said, "What?" And he said, "You've got the border between China and India wrong." And I said, "We're basing it on Google." And he said, "Yeah, well, Google's incorrect." And what I responded, which is absolutely true, we're happy to have both China and India put up their own maps with competing boundaries. It doesn't really matter. So we're using Google because it's useful. But we've gone against Google on this. You can't find it in very many places. When you're georeferencing a map, right, in the map warper, on the side there's a little plus, and you can bring that into OpenStreetMap, Google Hybrid, any number of Bing, any number of other mapping systems. So they're happy to have us use it. We applied for a grant from them, and I think we were within sort of a NATO second of getting the grant, or so we were told. And instead they went to OpenStreetMap, I think because of the possibility of commercializing that. If you look at OpenStreetMap, it has the local Starbucks, etc., but that was not something that we were entertaining. Great, well thank you all for coming.